you might want to save money in cutting a corner here and there. And I realize there's times as a small business owner, which I am, you can't have everything 100%. You have to find ways to save money, to be efficient. I get all that. But it is also costly for you to hire the wrong person.
You need to stop thinking about how to do it and thinking about who you can get to do it for you. So it's who, not how.
Like, hey, all I have enough is for one logo. It would be better for you to go and get a really quality logo or get quality messaging and a quality logo versus I need colors, I need typography, I need photography. Like, don't spread yourself too thin.
Welcome to the Brand Nerd Podcast. I'm Mitch Metter. Join me as we nerd out over great brands, study the latest business tech, and learn proven strategies from experts and entrepreneurs. Let's get started. What up, nerds? We're back at it. This is season 0 of the Brand Nerd Podcast.
Yes.
And last week, we got into some brand strategy. Specifically, we broke down the story brand framework and how to create an awesome message for your local brand. And today, we're taking the next step. I'm bringing in Pete Rodriguez because he's a visual branding dude.
Hello. Yeah.
And so we're going to take the next step. We're going to take those words and we're going to turn it into a beautiful visual ID. And the question that we're going to answer today is how to create a memorable visual ID for your local business.
One of the things that we talk about is not using jargon. So just to clarify, visual ID means visual identity.
That's correct.
And all that means is just your visuals, right? Your logos, your da-da-da-da. So
what do you look like? What's that first impression?
correct. What is that first impression?
So last week we talked about messaging, and to just quickly recap, it's a noisy world out there. People are being inundated with messages, whether it's advertising, whether it's politics, and we need to break through the noise. And the way that we do that is by being clearer than everybody else. Clarity beats clever. It beats creativity. Ideally, you could figure out a way to be clear and creative, clear and clever, but at the end of the day, you have to be clear. You have to let people know exactly what it is you do and how you make their life better.
Yeah.
So this week, we're taking the next step in brand strategy, and we're creating a visual ID. So, Pete, I'm going to ask you the big question. What goes into a visual ID?
Yeah. I love that you're talking about clarity, because the clarity in the message should translate really well to clarity in your visuals. And so visual, I think when you say, hey, what's your visuals? The first thing you think of is a logo. People are quick to, logo is such an overused term. It's like everyone says, I need a logo, or, I need, that's the first thing they think of. And one of the things that's important to mention is that the order in which we're even talking about these, of messaging, strategy, and then messaging, and then your visuals, because your visuals, they need to be birthed out of conviction and meaning. And that's where messaging is so that's really important. So I would say, to be clear, logos, another big pillar of visual is colors. What colors are you using? When you look at McDonald's, they're using red and yellow. They invoke hunger, right? All those types of things. You get into color theory. You can go as deep as you want into some of these things. So color, and then typography, and another word for typography is fonts. So, if you're working on Microsoft Word, you choose through fonts. You do this kind of stuff every single day. Even the smallest businesses are utilizing these softwares, and you're choosing fonts. So in a lot of ways, you're making decisions as a designer would make a decision. Right. So if you want to use Times New Roman, that's going to give you a certain look. And obviously I'm using the most basic Microsoft fonts, but to make this relatable,
but
Times New Roman, right? Helvetica, Arial. And so you're going into that document and making a conscious decision of what font you want to use to convey something, right? And a designer is doing the same exact thing. They're saying, man, looking at this messaging, looking at what the company stands for, what fonts or typography, what colors do I want to use to work together to create a logo? And I would say the size of what you need to do will determine how that entire brand family looks. And some companies need a large variety of logos. You know, some companies have Nike Dubai, Nike US, Nike, you know, and there's different marks for each geographical location. Some company, and that's not who we're talking to here. Obviously, we're talking to local service providers. So
Yeah.
they might not need all the bells and whistles that a big business will, but that's where
But a lot of companies will expand into new services and potentially need that as well.
yeah, and sometimes it's like, okay, then we keep the logo the same, but then we create a icon system where each either location has a slightly different icon or each service has a slightly different icon. So there's different ways to approach it. And you and I have worked together on enough projects that we've probably approached those things in different ways. You can, you know, I think what people get, they're really quick to, hey, we have a new division, we have a new whatever, let's create a new logo.
Yeah.
And that's where it's like, whoa, let's reel back in. Let's think about what we're doing here. And that's where it's really helpful to have another voice, perhaps an external voice, a third party, someone like Brand Nerd.
Yeah.
but to come in and just say, hey, let's think about what we're doing here and why we're doing it. And hopefully make sure that we're being like consistent across the board with visuals. Because how many times have we worked with people that have like a different logo for like just a different service that they offer? And we're like, no, we could have just reinforced the existing brand rather than spreading ourselves too thin. And that happens all the time. And so, I kind of covered more than you asked me, but that's kind of visual identity, like from a 30,000 foot view.
You covered logos, you covered typefaces or fonts, you covered colors, and you know those are definitely the basics of like a brand guideline, a visual brand guideline. And of course, there can be other things that could be in there. And you mentioned like, hey, maybe you have different logo positionings, like you have your horizontal logo for some instances and a more vertical stacked looked for other things. And sometimes your stacked logo is your primary, your horizontal can also be your primary. It just kind of depends on like, you know, if you have a really long company name, you know, you're kind of like, you almost need to stack it because you're like, we need to fit this into a square format more often than not, especially digitally. You're looking at like profile pictures and things like that, where it's got to be square or circle but it can be the same even on the side of a service truck or something. You know, you want to use your real estate well. So we covered what goes into a visual identity. The next thing that came to my mind is, when is it time to rebrand? Because ideally it's day one, right? Like ideally you start a company and you hire a great designer, a great branding agency, and they give you an awesome brand that can live for 10 years. But maybe that's not super realistic. You know, if you're cash flow and you're starting a business and it's just you probably don't have that level of thought going into it. You probably do it yourself or hire somebody that you know that can do an affordable thing. So when is it time to do a rebrand?
Yeah, I think the first phrase that comes to my mind right away is like, done is better than perfect.
Sure.
Right. And just to your point, if you're a solopreneur, you're getting something launched off the, you know, from nothing, you need to have something rather than stressing about having the perfect thing. And if you can think of great messaging and great other, like some of those other really critical pieces, like your logo is a piece of that. So if you're missing one piece of the pie, you still have other pieces to play with, right? So
still a pretty good pie.
It's still a pretty good pie, right? You would still enjoy it. And so I think initially, to your point, off the bat would be best case scenario, because you're launching with something right away. You see this a lot with Kickstart like products where they're launching with a brand and the brand, it hasn't even come out yet, but they already have the branding established.
Yeah.
And that creates buy-in for people to like invest into something, and then they launch the product. I think the second best time though really is like when, it sounds too simple, but like when you can afford it. It is better for you to put your money away to save up and pay someone well than to try to get a $200 logo with no like direction with it. Like there's times like, sure, yes, you can go to Fiverr and get a decent logo, right, for a fair price, but it's a once and done transaction. So you don't want, like, you want to work with people you're going to have access to.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of what I sell as a designer. I'm not just selling you the product, but I'm selling you access. If you come back to me and say, hey, this person's asking for a particular file, can you export that? Because I don't even know how to do that.
Sure.
I'm like, yeah, it's going to be in your inbox in 10 minutes. It's done. That's not something I'm charging you for, right? Like,
Yeah.
And I think that's really, really, really important. So saving up and valuing it enough to save for it.
Yeah.
And when you get to a point saying, having the discipline to say, yes, we're going to invest in branding, is really big.
I think a good exercise for a lot of businesses to go through, if they're in that kind of spot where they're like, am I losing out because of my logo, because of my branding? Is that actually something that's hurting me on the competitive marketplace? I think a great thing to do would be just to take your 5 to 10 biggest competitors, people who are competing for, local sponsorships or competing for, you're seeing their companies over and over again on jobs that you're bidding. Or what I would suggest is actually taking those logos and putting them all on one Word document or whatever you're comfortable doing, and just asking some people, like, forget everything
Yeah, what jumps out to you?
what are the companies you want to hire on here?
Right.
I think that's a great exercise to go through.
It's like a blind taste test.
Yeah. And there's a couple different scenarios that I see with companies when they come and say, hey, we're looking to rebrand. What do you think? There's some people just have a bad logo. It was probably bad day one.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It probably was, they went in their Word. Some you can tell for sure what they did is they went into like a word processor, picked a font, typed in their company name, and found the one they liked the best, and they rolled with it.
Right.
Then there's another scenario where you have a logo that at one point was probably really good and really competitive, but it's been 10 years, it's been 15 years even, and it just looks 10 or 15 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And those are signs that other people pick up on as well.
Yeah.
If you're looking through for a plumber or for an electrician or for a dentist, and you see a logo that's clearly outdated, you just pause for a second and go like, I wonder if their service is also outdated.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
two things come to my mind. The first thing you said was very simple logos. I go to a word processor and I type something in, and we call that, like, right now we're living in an era of bland. We're actually leaving that era from a design perspective when I say era. But if you walk through Target, you'll see all these like toothpaste companies and all these like shape razors, and they're very simple, right? It's literally like Futura, tracked out, spaced, like each letter is spaced out really nicely, and that's their logo. It'll be like Smile, and that's the name of the toothpaste brand.
Right.
Which is different from you going into your word processor, because the designer still thoughtfully approached that very simple font.
Yeah.
So it's done with intention. But I will say they're adding a lot of other things to that brand outside of the logo, which is just like, right. So they're making sure that they have pops of color and all these different like fonts and photography.
Right.
All of their photos are really loud and stuff. So the logo doesn't have to captivate you because other things are captivating you within the brand, right? They have phenomenal photos of a dad over the sink with his son, and they're brushing their teeth, and they have suds all over their mouth, and they're smiling, and that's what's captivating you. It's not the little font on the bottom that says smile,
Right.
Which is different from how you're presenting yourself as as maybe a local service provider. I'll let you go ahead and share.
Well, no, the thing I was thinking of as you're saying that is like my instinct when it comes to a logo is like, I want some sort of visual representation in there of what you do. So if you're a toothpaste, I want a tooth or something, a some sort, or maybe like something that looks shiny, like something that is clearly saying this is going to clean your mouth, this is going to make your breath better, whatever that is, in a visual form factor. But if you do have a bland, then you have to represent that on the packaging in some other way.
Yeah.
So,
I think
so maybe it's like a mint leaf somewhere on there, or
Yeah.
like, different things that aren't part of the logo. You have to do that other ways. And so you can get away with that bland, if you will,
Yeah.
when you are thinking on all levels. But a lot of times what happens with like a service company is maybe they are thinking on the level of like, I want this to be simple. I don't want it to be, too confusing or too, like, I'm not a designer, so let me just, pick a font. The problem with that often becomes they never do anything else to support it visually.
Support it. Yep. And that's the biggest thing, is that I think you could effectively, like, if you're just starting something today, I think you could go into Microsoft Word and literally type out something and make yourself a quote unquote logo. But it needs to be supported by other things.
Yeah.
If you're not doing that, then I think you're doing yourself a disservice. And that's the difference between what we would see, what we would call a bland from like Target versus like your version of just typing something out. They're different.
Yeah.
What was it? Remind me of the second point that you had made. So you said the first one was just like a word processor, and then the second thing.
Well, it's just at one point this logo was probably
Correct.
pretty good. Like,
That's
think
right.
about it in terms of like, you remember like icons on the original iPhone? Like,
Yeah.
there's like, they're like 3-dimensional,
Yeah.
and they look like little bubbles that you could touch.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then over time, the iPhone or, an Android did the same thing, where like everything was very flat, and it was the opposite of that. It was almost like they were drawn on paper and your screen was just a flat piece of paper.
Yeah.
And now it's somewhere in between. It's kind of going like a little bit back towards.
More bold, pops of color. Like, not to go down this rabbit trail too much, but the last iOS that Johnny Ive designed was, I forget which iPhone it was. It might have been the 6.
And
or
Johnny
something.
Ive's like the legendary Apple designer.
Yeah, it was the one where you swipe down and everything was almost like glass.
Yeah.
It was like, you know what I'm talking
I know
about?
exactly
And
what
like
you're
the
talking
circles and stuff. That was the last one that he designed, and that one was when it was like all flat.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? Every icon was just 2-dimensional. It was disappeared. And now to your point, it's going back to like some hybrid of the two, which I like.
Yeah.
But what I wanted to say about your second point about you might have a logo and it's 5 to 10 years old and it's starting to feel outdated. I think you're spot on. People feel that, whether they ever say it or not. There's a subconscious like feeling of this company's feels outdated.
There's a little bit of security there, and I think that's the argument a lot of these business owners would make, is like, well, this has been around a long time. People understand that. And maybe even if they don't know our company name from being in the community, they're new to the area.
Yeah.
They still see this kind of like retro something in that. But I think they're confusing themselves, because you can rebrand and still capture the essence of what that is, to the point where you probably, for your less visually attentive customers, they won't even notice the rebrand, really.
And we'll look at, hopefully we have some time, I want to look at a specific site where they do a lot of old companies and they rebrand them. It's Jones, Knowles and Ritchie, JKR.
Sure.
We can
Bring
look
that
at
up.
them.
Yeah.
They do massive corporate brands, which that's not who we're speaking to, but it's a good example of how do you take something that is existing and established and just redesign it in a way that's very recognizable. What I wanted to say, though, in regards to your second point, was there's two things that came to my mind as you said that. The first is the Subway model. Subway Foods or whatever, they rebrand every 5 years, corporate. And it's up to obviously the franchise owners to keep revising the store. But when they rebrand, they essentially it's the same logo, but they're just revising it in a way it's obviously recognizable, but it's refreshed. So I wouldn't even say rebrand. It's more of like a refresh every 5 years.
So they think fresh every 5 years.
They think fresh every 5 years.
Gotcha.
They practice what they preach, okay? They really do. That's great. I love that you said that. The second thing that came to my mind, though, is like timelessness. And I am a sucker for like old designers who just believed in like Massimo Vignelli and some other old designers that I love, like the founding fathers of design kind of, or modern design, I should say. They believed in timelessness, that, your logo really shouldn't need to be changed all the time. And it's not that I think your logo can change and should change if it needs to, but it's worth considering timelessness in what you are doing, because timelessness in design fights the temptation to follow trend. So there are times where it's appropriate for your brand to be a trendy brand, and then there's other times where you might be a more stoic and timeless brand that that when you do refresh, you're not going to do something completely new. It's really just going to be a tweak to what you're doing. Tighten things up a bit, maybe brighten the color, like little things.
Yeah.
Very subtle though. And yeah, that's huge. And those are two kind of models where it's like, hey, we know we're going to rebrand every 5 to 10 years. That's just what we do. We give it a fresh look. Or you kind of approach it like, hey, let's create something that's really simple that's going to work in 10 and 20 years.
Two major brands that come to mind, and these are two of the behemoths. So I hope everybody can just visually, if you're listening to the audio version of this, you can just picture this in your mind. But one is Starbucks. If you look at the history of Starbucks, and you might need to, if you're listening to the audio version, you might need to go ahead and pull up the visual for this, or the video, because you might not even have noticed that Starbucks has rebranded 3 or 4 times in the past 15 years. Because they do such a good job at taking what's already there and just bringing it into the modern age.
To me, that's like a refresh.
Right, exactly.
Right?
Well, and that's what we're talking about when we're taking like an established brand. Yeah, we're refreshing it. And then the other one that I hope people can visualize is Apple. And if you think back to like the OG Macintosh computers, they had the multicolored Apple print, and we learned from listening to Steve Wozniak live a couple months ago that the reason they did that is because they had the first color monitor, and so that was important for them to have the color, those colors in the logo, because that was saying something about them. But it's such a cool, makes a great T-shirt now because it's got that retro awesome vibe. But then you get to like the 90s and you get that slick, shiny, again, it's that almost bubbly, like you can touch it, right? It's this silver, it looks like glass, plastic or something. And then now you get more current day, and the past 10 years, it's literally just a stamp.
It's black and white.
You see it on the back of every Apple computer,
right? And
it's just that shadow almost of the original image. But never do you question, is this Apple?
Right.
Right.
That's the beauty of timelessness, is that it is you never compromise recognizability. And I want people to understand that, again, we are talking to local service providers, and you are not Apple. Like, you are not that. Your brand is not on that level, and you understand that, and I understand that. But so you may need to rebrand and be open to every 5 to 10 years refreshing your look. And perhaps you hit a point, hopefully you hit a point where you're crushing it so much that you're like, hey, we're looking now to establish something for the long term. But I drove past in the city, a brand that was on the side of a building, and I remember when it was done a year or two ago, and now it just looks like old. I saw it, I was like, man, that just looks kind of like it just doesn't look good.
Thought into it.
And then I saw right next to it, I saw another brand that looks super fresh that was done around the same time, and it still holds up. And so what is that? What is that difference?
Well, and it's also kind of like fashion. Like, I can speak on this firsthand because I pay zero attention to fashion. I've worn a black T-shirt for like 15 years straight. But the thing is fashion, by the time it hits the mainstream, it's already old. Like you buy something and you're like, oh, this is the thing that's fashionable. Well, you're in the 80% that pays no attention or little attention to fashion. In the same way, when you hire a designer, you're hiring somebody that's paying attention to design trends. And if you're not, if they're just taking what's trendy exactly right now, you might be hitting the very end of that trend. And then that's when something looks old
quickly,
very quick. But there comes a point in your business where you need to grow up with your brand.
Right.
I believe this thoroughly. It's the same idea as when you start and you're in your word processor or whatever it is, you hire your nephew or niece to create your logo. At that point in your business, you are willing to take on just about any customer because you're in that startup phase. You're in that struggle. Like, let me just get into some houses. Let me get some customers coming through the door. And that is appropriate for that logo. In fact, that logo probably communicates that. Like, hey, this is a guy who's just starting out. This is a girl who's just cutting their teeth. This might be a more affordable option for me, and that's the type of customer that you'll attract. But as your company grows, as you grow in employees, you want to project the level of professionalism and process and brand that you've established over time. And so there comes a point where your logo no longer fits your company.
Yeah.
I saw it actually this morning as well. Literally this morning I was walking, I saw a company, and I can't even remember what it's called, but I remember it was, something in Sons Construction, and that's all that the logo was.
Yeah.
It had a phone number, but they had a truck and they had a trailer parked in somebody's driveway. They had the same exact design on both of them. It was just a white truck, white trailer with something in Sons Construction, and a picture of a level was like in the middle as like the breakup line between the something in Sons and construction. And I thought a couple things as I was walking by. I was like, man, it's literally just black and white. So that's saying, pretty simple. Like, these guys are they better be affordable. You know what I mean? Like, this isn't a high end thing. The other thing I thought is construction. Man, that's a lot of things.
Yeah.
Like, they happen to be putting siding on the house that I saw, but I was like, construction. Like, do you do all the construction things?
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, if it's a general contractor, then I'd be like, yeah, I guess they do. They'll do all the things or whatever. But it just said construction, which to me is everything from like excavating to, I don't know,
Putting in a vanity, like
yeah, exactly, yeah, custom cabinetry, like construction is all the things. So it was confusing at both the message level, it was confusing at the design level, and it just made me go like, man, I feel like you're missing out on so much. And I think there's this idea that if I just get my logo out there, that people are gonna that's gonna be enough. But even the fact that like their phone number, it didn't have any call to action, they didn't even have a website.
Right.
I don't know. There's just multiple things that made me kind of go, I don't know if this is somebody that would be easy for me to hire.
Yeah. And as a small to medium sized business, and a lot of those businesses have the founder or CEO or like a high up person in the company still actively doing things.
Yeah.
Like, right. Like, it's not uncommon that one of those guys, you said Blank and Sons from that construction, one of those guys probably in that house, it wouldn't have been unlikely if it was one of the sons or perhaps even the father himself working.
The guy I saw better be one of the sons. Otherwise there's going to be some child labor disputes.
Exactly. But so that logo is attached to and representative of you.
Yeah.
Whereas like when you look at a big business, that like when you see a logo, you're not necessarily thinking of the person on top of that business. You're thinking of what they represent as a company or like whatever it might be. So, I mean, yeah, that's a good example of just being specific, making it clear about what you do. And if you do everything, it's like, maybe that's your slogan. We do everything.
yeah. We do it all.
We do everything.
The phrase that I've heard many times is, if you try to be everything to everybody, you'll end up being nothing to nobody.
Yeah.
People if they're looking for one thing, they don't want the jack of all trades to do it. They want the person that specializes in that one thing. Even if they want one or two things, like there's things that go together. If this guy's hanging siding, like the other thing he could probably, if that's his main thing, which I have no idea if it is, but if it is, then maybe he does windows as well. Maybe he does roofs. Like maybe just focuses on exteriors. Like that should be part of the brand. That should be something that you communicate.
What if that logo, again, we're thinking about that trailer that you saw, if that logo, as maybe, not to knock him, but as trash as that logo may have been, if that was over color, it would have had different impact. if that logo was over, if you had a printout and they handed
Mm-hmm.
you something and they say, hey, this is who we are, and it was a picture of a dad with his sons and the whole family, and that logo is like sitting, that would have different impact.
Yeah.
And that's
Picture of a before and after.
before and after, correct.
So you can like see what construction means.
Yep. A picture of the work in progress, right? With all their guys working. And then the next picture of someone and their family in the space that they were working in. Like, we create meaningful spaces for people. All of that is.
Instead, all they had was a level.
Yeah.
So what I know about them is that they are a construction company and they will build stuff straight.
Exactly. All of those things, man. I speak to the power of visuals.
So I think we've kind of like answered the question, when is it time to rebrand?
We're beating this horse. This horse is dead.
Yeah, this horse was dead a while ago, but maybe we're passionate about it.
No, man.
No, I mean this is. I mean, when you live in our brain space, like this is what we see when we walk around in the world.
Yeah, and when is it time? Like, again, we're gonna move on, but like, when is it time? Asking that question, that's different for everyone. That's why we keep giving different examples and talking about it, because when it's time for one business, is not going to be the same for another, and there's a lot of area to cover to determine. There's not a one solution fix all for when is it time. It's like, it will be different for everyone.
Yeah. So, some of this stuff we got into a little bit, but just like thinking about what you do in a rebrand, like how does that actually unfold?
Yeah.
We talked about the fact that we start with message. We talk about your target customer or character in the framework that we discussed last week. And so when you start to think about a logo, when you start to think about colors, when you start to think about a slogan or a call to action, all of those things, you're starting with that customer in mind.
Yeah.
And then you also want to bring in a little bit of like your values and authenticity to you and the expectations that you're trying to set. All of these things come in. And you actually mentioned it as well, that like colors can have meaning. And I think, some of the basics are like blue is trustworthy. You mentioned red and yellow being something that like inspires hunger. That's why you see red on McDonald's. You see it on Burger King. You see it on Wendy's. You see it on KFC, like Chick-fil-A. They're all red. Why are they red? Because that means something. An interesting one that somebody brought up to me recently is like, sometimes you purposefully go, all right, well, then let's be the blue fast food company just so we stand out.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like Taco Bell actually rebranded recently, and they went from, their classic red, yellow, whatever.
Goldish.
And now they're like purple,
Right.
like purple everywhere.
Right.
And maybe recently is not the right word.
But the last,
in
5 years.
yeah,
maybe.
exactly. So like, but that's a pretty awesome like juxtaposition compared to these other brands that are.
Yeah, and they can do that because they have taken the time to position themselves from a messaging and standpoint to target youth.
Yeah.
Target Taco Bell's person is like, I don't know exactly their exact character, persona, or target customer, but it's definitely a young person, late night, let's go grab some tacos, we're hungry. That sort of vibe. So it works for them to be different. I think Burger King even was confusing to me. Their old logo, they've rebranded since to the more retro version, which is actually a back brand because they went backwards but refreshed a backwards version of their logo. But yeah, I think Taco Bell's a little bit unique in that regard because everything is selling burgers, French fries, and whatever. Taco Bell's selling tacos, and it's just they have the opportunity to do something different. But yeah, colors have meaning, man. You talked about like orange, even has energy, revitalization, that sort of stuff. You think about green. What do you think of like the color green? I mean, I think of going green, like recycling.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, just because you're a fast food restaurant and you want to stand out, you can't. In my opinion, sometimes blue is not the right option.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Like blue could represent. I've heard people discuss like the old Burger King logo as like, why is there blue? because blue is like mold, and like blue is cool, and there's nothing about your food that's
interesting.
like so maybe they use that blue to stand out, but ultimately it may have been for one reason or another the reason why they changed it, because like no one else is using blue.
I think they changed it because of that creepy king guy that they had running
The
around
king,
the
yeah.
commercials.
They still use him, I think.
Oh, do they?
Maybe they should create a cartoon version of him or something. It's less creepy.
Yeah.
Oh man!
I think
All
well,
right.
they actually embraced it for a while. And
There's
they
a
did-
video game. I
they
have
did-
the video game.
What right, but I'm saying like after a while when people were like, this guy's super creepy, I think they ran a commercial campaign where he was like standing outside people's houses in the dark. It's like, all right, at least they're self-aware.
No,
now.
I think they were doing that stuff like obviously intentionally and on purpose. But yeah, dude, they had a. It was called Big Bumpin' Burger King something, but it was like. It was an Xbox game, and there was like go-karts, and you could be the chicken, you could be the king, you could be.
Nice.
I remember buying that, dude. It was like $30, and I bought a Burger King game for
Crazy.
Xbox.
That's
It didn't come in a cereal box the way it did when we were growing up. You'd get like a CD-ROM and a cereal
Oh yeah,
box.
I remember playing like the Captain Crunch game.
Yeah, no way. Are
Yeah.
you serious?
Yeah.
Are you serious,
Yeah,
bro?
yeah,
Oh
totally. It was like internet. It was like Flash internet days.
Bro, the Captain Crunch game. When my wife and I were first dating, we were just talking about this, and she was like, "Do you remember the Captain Crunch game that came?" And I freaked, dude. I was like, "I'm gonna marry her now." Like, I proposed in that Walmart. No, I didn't. I just got so excited because the Captain Crunch game. Oh my goodness, you could do a little. You had to feed the crunch berries.
I don't remember hardly.
Okay,
I remember.
all right.
I remember it was like, was there like a mine car or like
Yeah.
some sort of like?
Yeah,
It was like cave.
You were
thing?
in a cave.
Yeah.
It was the captain in a cave with crunch berries.
Yeah.
The crunch berries were like these little puffy creatures.
Yeah.
Which now that I think about it, why were they in a cave?
They
That's
should have been
little
on a
freak.
boat. He's a captain.
Yeah, that would have made a lot more sense. There was the mini games, and you can skateboard with like the
Yes,
crunch berries.
totally.
And you hit the space bar to jump.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway,
Yeah.
wow,
It was a terrible game, but it was.
it was free.
I played it.
It was free. The
Wow.
issue was I just
Yeah.
never had a lot of like name brand cereals because my mom always got the Walmart.
We didn't have video game system growing up,
Exactly.
so like it was
Exactly.
like the closest thing I had until
Yeah.
I got like PC games was, and then eventually we got a GameCube, which
I love the GameCube. I think the big bags from Walmart, like the Malto Meal brand, was called
Yeah.
Colossal Berries, and it just came in this big trash bag full of like
Oh, yeah.
Captain Crunch. So when we would pour cereal in the morning, you didn't pour a box, you poured like this bag.
Yeah.
And you were just
yeah,
like,
we had that too. My mom did. She bought like Tupperware-esque
Yeah.
containers that the cereal would go in. But yeah, no.
man, the Crunch Berry. game.
Listen,
Thank you
generic
for saying
cereal
that.
technology has come a long way because back then it was trash.
Yeah.
But like now,
close, man.
occasionally,
go to
we'll buy
BB's
the
and-
generic Fruit Loops, and my son doesn't know the difference.
Exactly. Anyway, all right. Well, hey,
So wow.
that's memory lane.
So
Brands.
didn't
Local
have that on the rundown.
Local service providers.
So, just to recap some of the things we talked about, like the assets that you actually want when you're talking about a rebrand, like I think this is important for business owners to understand, because when you go into a conversation with a designer, they're going to have maybe their expectations of what you want, and you're going to have your expectations, which might not always line up. So just to kind of go over the things that I think are important, that we think are important. I think obviously a primary logo is really important, as well as a use guide for like how you put that on things. Obviously you don't want, if you have a logo that's dark, you don't want to put that on a dark background where it doesn't make any sense. So having different uses for different, or different, setups, different colors for different uses is important. And then a guide to help you understand how to use it.
Right.
It also really helps to have that when you're working with a new vendor. Say you're getting t-shirts made or something like that. My suggestion is call your designer.
Right.
Have them help you. But if you're, I know a lot of companies just don't want to take that extra step for whatever reason. And, at least you have the brand guidelines to send over to the t-shirt company to help them understand how to use your brand.
Yeah, you might hear different terminology too. Like you might hear brand guidelines, brand standards, usage guides. Like those are all saying the same thing. It's just essentially a document that tells you what to do and what not to do with your logo. And also, that's what you just said is like another reinforcement to hire someone that you have access to.
Yeah.
Hire people that you can actually reach out to and like humans, right? Like not some person across the globe who's just a once and done service. Like that's some part of that is the value of saying, hey, I just got this proof from this printer, screen printer, and here's what our logo looks like on it. What do you think? And then the designer can say, you know, for this case, we should use this version of the logo. It's actually going to work a little better, I think. And yeah, I wanted to mention this earlier. If I could just backtrack for 1 second to say, when we deliver a logo package, all of the logos, I just wanted to mention that we deliver the full, like whatever variations of the logo, right? We'll give you that logo in different file types. And by file types, I just mean you're going to get that in a PNG, a PDF, JPEG, all those different things, but you're also going to get that in different colorways. So you're going to get a white version, you're going to get a black version, you're going to get a full color version, an inverted version, like different, grayscale version. And I wanted to mention that we were talking about logos earlier, but just to actually give you an idea, a visual of like, what do I receive after that logo is designed? I say, wow, I love it. What comes right after that is like, you actually get a package of all the different logos and all the different colors that we've decided on and all the different file types that you're ever going to possibly need.
Right.
So
I think some other things that you want to consider when you're having that conversation with your designer is not only the primary logo, but what are those secondary things?
Yeah.
Whether that's, we talked about other positionings of the logo, but also maybe it's breaking out certain things in the logo to become like a secondary stamp or a pattern that you can use for background on different things.
Yeah, dude. Love that.
We even talk about like, if you have a slogan, we develop a message while we're developing your message. A lot of times we're like, well, what's the slogan? What's like that, like 6-word thing that everybody immediately can latch on to? Well, that can have its own font, essentially typeface, whatever you want to call it, that you can use over and over again. And it can stand alone. It can be part of the logo setup. And having all of those things thought through for you so that you're not just slapping stuff together. You've got all of that involved. Another thing that is really common for local service companies in particular is a mascot of some sort.
Yeah.
Whether it's like, if you have a pet around the office that becomes the mascot, or, maybe it's you go Liberty Mutual and you get yourself an ostrich.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
Those are all things that help people identify your company immediately. And if you're in the local parade on Memorial Day or whatever, and your logos or your mascot is an ostrich, maybe you have a big ostrich on your float or something. Like there's fun things you can do with it that becomes associated with your brand. And it even helps you, like if somebody's going like, have you tried, XYZ roofing? And they're like, have I heard of them? They're like, they're the one with the ostrich. Oh yeah, I've seen their trucks. Yeah, I'll give them a call.
Right.
Like there's things that happen with those fun visual identity things that you can do, and mascots is one way to do that.
Yeah, slogans, man, are huge. Yeah. If you drive by, if I tell you you're driving on the highway, you're going to work, and you look up and you see a billboard, and it's red and orange, and it says "Have it your way" on it. Who's that for?
Taco Bell. No. Burger King.
Burger King, right?
Yeah.
That's not. I mean, that's an easy example. It's like you can go down the list. What's in your wallet? You could do like a good neighbor. Yeah. Right? So if you're driving down and you look up and you see a billboard, and on it is a picture of a kid mowing the elderly woman's lawn, right? And she's out there like smiling, and he's pushing the lawnmower, and you kind of get this image in your mind, and it just says "like a good neighbor." Yeah. Right? And it just has the icon. It doesn't even have the full logo for State Farm, right? State Farm. It is State Farm, right? Like a good neighbor. State Farm is there. Yeah, you're good. Okay, I was like, wait, that would be terrible if I did this whole analogy and I didn't even get the logo right. If they just had the icon, it didn't say State Farm anywhere on the billboard, you would know And so those are all graphical
Right.
representations of what a slogan could be. And then the second thing that you said was about
Mascot.
mascots. NJM, I just wanted to mention this. NJM is an insurance company, and their whole thing is that they don't have a mascot. So their mascot is that they don't have one, and all they do in their commercials is make fun of like people that do. And it's very successful because they're like, yeah, we just do insurance. We don't have mascots. And like they've made that their mascot.
Right.
And it was a really clever way of like just flipping it a little bit.
Well, insurance is so competitive, which is why like when you're studying brands, insurance is fantastic.
Yeah.
Like you can do you know, there's been some amazing commercials. There's obviously like the caveman commercial.
Yeah.
Geico's really got a lot of them. They've got the best or like the longest lasting slogan in 15 minutes could save you 15% or more on your car insurance. Like I can just spout that off because I've heard it a gazillion times. But they got the gecko, they got the caveman, they got all these, you know, awesome assets to their brand. But part of what's cool about insurance too is you'll have a dramatic commercial and then you'll have a hilarious commercial, all from the same company. Like they don't live in one lane. So insurance is a great study. And my personal favorite has got to be the Mayhem. Like the Mayhem commercials of the past 5 years are just insane.
The one where he's dancing, he's doing like a TikTok video. He's recording himself, and he's like, "I'm Mayhem, and I'm a teenager recording the latest, you know, TikTok trend."
Right.
And then the guy's like watching as this person's with a tripod in the middle of the street, and then he gets into a car accident.
Well, you think they're like, I love that one too because it's like it does the switch. Like you think like, oh, somebody's gonna hit this kid in the middle of the road.
Yeah, totally. And it's the guy who gets into the accident. Yeah. So, man, I love that.
Yeah. So, Geico has had that 15. Well, I don't know. The 15 minutes might be new, but the save 15% on your car insurance.
I'm switching to Geico.
Has been around since the beginning. At least, like you look at their first website, it's on there.
Yeah. So going back to local service people and speaking to them, like you don't need everything. You just need to, and a good designer, a good agency, a good partner is going to help you determine what you need. And sure, because not every brand is going to need patterns and X, Y, and Z. Like they don't all need that. So for you, I just had someone ask me the other day, here's what I do. What do you think I need? Like what brand package would you offer me? And I was like, I honestly think for you, like a logo, a primary logo, some colors, and a font typography recommendation, and I'll give you a brand standard.
Right.
I feel like that's plenty. Right. And then if you need to build upon it later.
And, refresh 5 years from now when you've hired 5 more people, or
if you need a pattern down the road, we can develop that. Exactly. If you need another icon, we can develop that based on the existing brand. It's like start with. I want to read this. I was thinking about this script. It's a piece of scripture, and I want to share it because I feel like it kind of speaks to. I know maybe it's a stretch, maybe it's not, but it's in Zechariah 4:10, and it says, "Do not despise these small beginnings, for the Lord rejoices to see the work begin, to see the plumb line in Zerubbabel's hand." But the idea there is like, don't despise. If you need to start with something really, really simple, if you're like, hey, all I have enough is for one logo, it would be better for you to go and get a really quality logo or get quality messaging and a quality logo versus I need colors, I need typography, I need photography. Like, don't spread yourself too thin. Be okay with the small beginning of something really sound and quality versus trying to do too much at once and getting overwhelmed and spending money where you don't need to be.
I think that definitely applies. That's really great.
Yeah.
Another thing is to consider when you're doing rebranding. You kind of just hit on this, like, what do I need? Think about where your brand appears visually right now. Think about the signage around your building if you're a brick and mortar type operation. Think about the trucks that you have on the road if that's what you are, if that's kind of if you're a home service and you're actually driving to people's homes. Think about these different applications. Think about the sponsorships at the local baseball field or nonprofits that you run, local magazines, maybe you run an ad, all the different places that your visual brand is showing up. That's that's how you can start to help determine that. And of course, bring these to your designer so they can understand what it is that their job entails.
Yeah. Part of that designer's job when they're thinking about your brand, you're a plumber, right? Okay, so where does that brand live? And that's what you're talking about. Is like, that's also not just on you, but the job and the role of the designer to create something that's going to work on a sign, on a business card, on a pencil. Like, your brand should be scalable. And it should work in all those different kinds of places. But yeah, I mean, take full advantage of the real estate that you have, the brand real estate that you already have. You don't need to go and get a billboard. It's like, what's accessible to you? What are areas? Are they yard signs? Okay, so let's look at like getting some new yard signs. And you and I have both experienced this, where not everything needs to be rolled out. Can you speak to that in the sense of, people get really overwhelmed, I think, thinking about rolling out a new brand across their entire business in one foul swoop. Like, it needs to all happen at once. Yeah. That's not the case. Like,
well, they get overwhelmed. They also think about their checkbook,
right,
and what they're signing up for.
Financially overwhelmed,
right? Because it's one thing to pay a designer thousands of dollars to do a rebrand. It's a whole another thing to think about the 10 trucks that you have on the road that you have to pay thousands of dollars to get each one wrapped individually. Right. So what we often suggest is, hey, especially if it's a brand refresh where we're just, we're taking existing brand assets and we're updating them for now and 10 years into the future, then what you do is you get, as you need to acquire new trucks, you wrap those as they come through. If it's an office building, you take care of your most important exterior signage first.
Right.
And as you can, you get down to the brochures and things that are already printed and, you can distribute over time. Luckily, we live in an age where, like, you don't have to order in bulk with printing to get good deals. It used to be like, you had to order an absurd amount to get a decent price per unit. But we live in an age of digital printing where this stuff, can be printed in smaller quantities. So like that, those are the things that we're considering with you. You just have to express those desires and we can help you do that.
Yeah. The term roll out.
Roll out.
Right? Think about having a yoga mat in your hand for a second. I know maybe no one listening to this podcast, I don't do yoga. Think about having like a yoga mat in your hand and you're going to roll it out. So you have you're holding the outermost part of that mat, and then you're going to roll out. And as it rolls out, it's unveiling the inner part of it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So that term alone,
that's the yoga part,
the yoga part,
right?
But listen,
the under part's the mat.
That term alone,
the yoga.
That term alone is like your exterior, like you were saying, the most important external, client facing pieces of your business are the first things that get done. The things that are internal can happen later on. They can happen in phases. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm just saying that even that term of rolling out a new brand literally comes from that idea that we're going to tackle the biggest client facing pieces first.
Yeah.
And then as we, we'll slowly work our way in to the internal documents that might have a logo on them. Like those things don't need to change right away.
And all of that sounds super overwhelming. It sounds expensive, which is why you need to stop thinking about how to do it and thinking about who you can get to do it for you. So it's who, not how.
People think it's expensive until you hire someone really who doesn't know what they're doing, right?
Yeah.
And then you go and you do it and you've had a logo and you're like, man, I'm not happy with this anymore. That's expensive too, though. Like, let's talk about that for a second. Like, you might want to save money in cutting a corner here and there. And I realize there's times as a small business owner, which I am, you can't have everything 100%. You have to find ways to save money, to be efficient. I get all that. But it is also costly for you to hire the wrong person. And so do you want the cost of quality or do you want the cost of inequality? No, I'm just kidding. But just the lack of quality, and that's not there. So I'm just being goofy.
Yeah. I hear you. I think that's spot on. So I think we've really covered how to create a memorable visual ID for your local brand. I think some of the questions that we answered were, what goes into a visual ID? What is a visual ID? When is it time to rebrand? How should you think about that? And what assets should you be looking at? So what I desire for listeners is that they can start to think about not only how this brand mentality affects the way they talk about their business, but it also affects how people look at their business. So you get to sound like the pro that you are. You get to look like the pro that you are. And these first impressions mean that people choose you more often. And when you establish a brand, you're able to charge what you're worth. That's a big deal.
Yeah.
When you have a less than ideal visual identity, people come to you with an expectation that maybe you're not charging as much.
Yeah.
Maybe you can't charge as much. You're positioning yourself as not the top of the field. Mm-hmm. And so people don't understand always that maybe you're offering an amazing service, but your visuals don't match that.
Right.
Additionally, when you think about the words and visuals, it helps people share what you do that much easier.
Yeah.
Like, hey, check out their website. Everything you need is right there. It'll explain it for you. Or people read the words on your website, the words that they resonated with, they can repeat those to their friends and neighbors and people who are experiencing the same dilemma that you were. Hey, before you sign off, if you made it to the end of this episode, that means you are our favorite, first of all.
Thank you.
Yep. So why don't you go ahead and leave us a review on whatever platform that you're listening to it on right now. It helps us reach more people like you. And go ahead and share it with your coworkers and anybody else who is in your anybody else who would also benefit from this podcast.
Sphere. You guys all have a sphere of influence. There's people in that circle that would benefit from it. So please share with them. We value it. It means a lot to us.
So that's a wrap for today's episode of the Brand Nerd Podcast. Thanks for joining us. Stay curious, and we'll see you next week. If you enjoyed this Brand Nerd Podcast clip, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. In the meantime, here are additional videos you might find illuminating.